If I said, do you think 1 grain of rice is too much for your blood glucose levels, what would you say? Just 1 small, insignificant grain of rice. How about 2 grains of rice? What if I said to you, we had 10 grains of rice? Is that going to affect your blood glucose levels? What would you say to me? I think if you ask most people, the answer would be no. It's not enough carbohydrate content there to do anything significant to your blood glucose levels. And of course, we're talking in the context of diabetes here. So only small portions aren't going to do a great deal. But this prompts the question, how much rice can you eat before it becomes a problem? And is it a problem at all? This is something we're going to dive into. Let's go. Well, now let's look at the other end of the spectrum. What would happen if you ate an entire coffee mug full of rice? Now that's dry rice, so that's going to be a big portion. When you cook it, the size of that's probably going to double, even triple, so it's going to take up the entire plate. I think most of us can be in agreement that if you're having trouble staying on top of your glucose levels in the first place, whether you have type 1, type 2, type 3, or any other form of diabetes, this could be a problem and result in a high sugar. So we know that 1 grain of rice isn't going to do a great deal. There's just not enough carbohydrate, calories, or anything there to do particularly anything with or without diabetes. But we also know that an entire coffee mug's worth of rice, it's probably going to be a problem. It's going to be a lot of food, and if you're having trouble controlling your blood sugars anyway, it could be really hard to dose if you have type 1 diabetes, and if you have type 2 diabetes, your body just might not be able to cope with that sheer carb load. So we can see it's a really difficult question to answer, but it's probably one of the most sought after questions when it comes to people trying to manage their diabetes. In reality, the answer is, it depends. If you have type 2 diabetes, it depends on how much your diabetes has progressed and whether your body can handle that carbohydrate load. And that'll vary from person to person. Usually we see that people who have had diabetes for a long time and it's progressed quite significantly, perhaps you've got lots of medications, then you might have difficulty controlling large portions of carbohydrate. But then perhaps the medications are actually taking up some of the slack for you. And therefore you're able to eat normal or bigger carbohydrate portions than what you'd expect compared to your peer or counterpart, because your medications, your tablets or your insulin is actually doing a lot of the work for you. Whether or not this means this is a healthy state for the body to be in is another debate. However, in the acute and possibly chronic setting, as long as the glucose levels are staying well maintained, you're not putting yourself at any significant risk in terms of damage from high glucose levels. Metabolically, completely different story, beyond the scope of this video. In type 1 diabetes, obviously you're having to rely on your insulins to do the job for you. And so a lot of that is going to be about how you're managing your insulin, how you're adjusting it based on what you're eating. Now, anecdotally, I do find that when you have larger portions of carbohydrates, it does become more difficult to dose and judge because of absorption rates, how the insulins work, etc. And I'm sure anyone watching this with type 1 diabetes will feel the same. So it can depend on the individual, how they're managing it, how their insulins are being absorbed, and essentially how comfortable they are with things like carbohydrate counting or using their experience to gauge their dose. So how can we address this problem in practice? I always encourage people to start from their point of reference. With type 1 diabetes, it's always a good idea to see how your glucose levels are responding from the dose you calculated, and then ultimately get some feedback about how well that's gone. Ideally, you'll be using some form of flash or continuous glucose monitor so you can see it in real time, or you can look back on your graphs day to day and get a good idea about how you're responding and how your management strategies are going. In type 2 diabetes, yes, you can be using the same insulins as someone with type 1 diabetes, but to be fair, there's probably more people not using that than there are. So it's the same principle. You look at how well your glucose levels are being controlled based on your existing lifestyle and diet and work backwards. If you have a high HbA1c, or if you're monitoring your glucose regularly throughout the day, you'll get instant feedback to show you exactly how well what you're doing is working for you. It doesn't necessarily even mean what you're doing is wrong. It just means for your body, it's not able to handle the amount of carbohydrates going into your diet that otherwise you might have been able to control previously, or someone else might have more success with. And of course, this is a chronic long-term problem, and so this would have built up over a number of years. But all is not lost, because you can turn back the clock by changing your lifestyle, for most people losing weight and getting as active as possible. If you find you are having a problem, then that's when to start making some changes. And if you want acute results, yes, we can lower the amount of carbohydrates. So if you're someone that's prone to having the full mug of rice, as opposed to the 1 grain, then maybe you can cut back, cut the portion in half or do 3/4, and then see how that works from there. If it's still not right, then we can dial it back. Of course, we don't want you to just eat less and be hungry, and that's where the value of adding additional foods that are lower calorie but also don't affect the glucose levels come in, such as vegetables and lean proteins like chicken, turkey, low-fat mince, fish, etc. If you're a vegetarian, there are meat replacements as well, which can really do a good job in terms of lowering the overall carbohydrate load and lowering the calories going into your diet, which can help exacerbate and encourage weight loss. So you can see then, when it comes to writing policies and advising patients generally, it becomes quite difficult for us dietitians and nutritionists to just put a blanket approach across to everybody, because everybody's different. However, a good starting point if you really want some strict rules is to maybe just start with 1/4 of the plate dedicated to carbohydrates or starch. Try and limit your sugars, have modest amounts of fruits, aiming for 2 to 3 portions a day, a portion being a handful, and then really trying to get as much vegetables and salads and things into your diet to encourage a good fiber intake. You've probably heard of the 5 a day message, whereby a portion being a handful of fruit or vegetables. Well, we aren't reaching that in the UK, and so we need to eat more. So 5 of those portions a day, and the part of that message that's missed out is that is a minimum. That's the minimum we want you to have. So anything over and above that is only a bonus. And then, as I said about the lean proteins, and incorporating those into the plate and the diet is always a good thing too. So we reduce the amount of carbohydrates and junk food, and we replace it with good, nutritive, nourishing foods. Of course, you can still enjoy yourself occasionally, going out for some drinks or dinner or having some treats. We're not the food police, we're not trying to stop you from having anything. And actually, it's this all or nothing dietary behavior that I try and get my patients and clients to get away from, and actually incorporate the slip-ups and the days out and the treats into their diet, because everybody does it, and so you shouldn't be any different. Really, the diabetes and your overall health from a lifestyle perspective is going to be the accumulation of an average of what you're doing. So you are the outcome of your overall behaviors. So we're looking at the average. And if you're struggling with your weight or your blood sugars are high, particularly in type 2 diabetes, and your high cholesterol, hypertension, heart disease, and these are lifestyle related, it shows that over a long period of time, on average, things haven't quite been right. We can change it, it's never too late. And then on average, we can start to turn back the clock by putting in good, solid foundations and dietary and exercise behaviors, which will help those diseases. Of course, if you need an extra helping hand, you can always reach out to your medical team. And we also offer consultancy services here at Diabetes Diet Guy. I'll drop a link in the comments, and also pull up a thing on the screen here, texting. And get in touch via the website if you need an extra helping hand. Anyway guys, we'll leave it there, and I hope that is useful.